Hello, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul.
Yes, hand the mic. Hi, I'm Marie-Louise, and I'm an AA graduate. I graduated in 2015. Paul and I are now running Intermediate 11 since this year, and we also run a practice called FAR. Do you want to talk a little bit about other experiences? Okay.
Go for it.
Basically, our CVs are pretty shared since graduating. So we've lived in Rotterdam, worked for OMA for a period of time. We also lived in Basel, Switzerland, worked for Herzog and Demerol, so two very big practices. And then we moved to Thailand, to Bangkok, to teach there for 2 years. That was our jump into academia. And we returned to the UK 2 years ago and now live on the south coast. And today we will talk about the cultural presence of material. Something else? No?
Okay.
Okay. So the topic we will discuss today is marble. This talk is part of a larger body of research that we've been conducting since 2019, along with our friend Christopher Lund. As a trio, we were, for one reason or another, drawn to marble. We've studied it, drawn it, read about it, visited the places of extraction, visited places of its implementation, and we've worked with it in the form of architectural sculpture. We're fascinated by the innate quality of this material, its history and potential. At a moment where sustainability is primarily discussed in numeric terms, we'd like to offer a parallel perspective which encapsulates questions of culture and meaning. To understand marble, it's helpful to start with this perspective. The image to the left is a picture taken by the Apollo 16 mission. The picture to the right, a marble sample. There's a self-similarity between the two, the totality of the planet and the single fragment that can be held by a person. Zoomed into the scale of Europe, on the left, a satellite map. Here we get an impression of islands and landscapes with a homogeneous character. On the right, a geological map reveals an abundance of meandering materials beneath the surface. Zoomed into the scale of a city, here Carrara, Italy, which is very famous for its marble. Here we took photographs of material close up and placed them alongside aerial maps and topographical maps. Again, this self-similarity between the big and the small reveals a world composed of scales and patterns which reference each other in a beautiful way. Beyond the surface of the material lies a story of deep time. Okay. In the past 440 million years, 70% of terrestrial species and 90% of marine life has perished due to the 5 great extinction events that shocked the planet. Sand, mud, coral, algae, and most notably the shells of marine organisms, rich in calcite, fell and accumulated on the seabed. Under the great pressure of the Earth movements and extreme inner Earth temperatures, the sedimentary layer formed crystals of granular rock, thus metamorphosing into marble. These formations moved across the global seas, and when continental plates collided, the material was violently thrust upwards, forming solid marble mountains. Marble is part of a geological space-time that precedes us. In this sense, marble is distinct from other natural materials such as wood or clay, in that it is the product of immense geological earthwork. To stand in a quarry is to see a section cut through time, marble being the material closest to eternity. Time is crystallized in the marble structure, color, and veining. It's this elemental quality that gives marble a certain aura. You get the impression you are seeing the inner workings of the earth.
One of the first cultures to attribute value to marble was the Cycladic culture between 3000 and 2200 BC. The inhabitants of the Cyclades crafted small marble figurines, approximately 40 centimeters in height. It is believed the material was found on coastal locations and washed ashore as linear pebbles. The figurines were displayed in the home as symbols of fertility and buried with their possessors. Marble thus took on a spiritual dimension, appropriated from nature and possessed into the afterlife. Prehistoric carvers manipulated the marble using harder emery rock, and a protractor was used to measure the proportional relationships between the body parts of the figurine. For 1,000 years, Cycladic culture duplicated the same symbol and sculpture with little deviation. Using slaves, saws, and sand, ancient Greek civilization was able to extract marble on an industrial scale in quarries. According to Pliny the Elder, marble was first used as a building material in the form of a defensive city wall on the island of Chios, not on grounds of superior elegance, as he says, but because no material could be found of a more substantial nature. Simultaneous to the scaling up, ancient Greek culture also continued to refine marble on the small scale. The vessel was articulated through pictorial reliefs and became increasingly sophisticated in its formal expression. The vessel was a prototype for architecture yet to come. So the first phase of scaling up resulted in what Gottfried Semper describes as acrolithic forms. These were early Greek temples that comprised a mix of materials, such as brick, limestone, and plaster. Marble was only used in special parts of the architecture that required sculptural refinement, such as pediments and entablatures. In order to hide material inconsistencies, Semper believes that the entire temple was then covered in a layer of paint. The most subtle, as he says, bodiless means of dressing. Painting marble, an idea really unthinkable today, suggests that marble's capacity to be sculpted and refined was more important than its visual appearance. With the expansion of the Roman Empire, marble became a signifier of status. Using sand imported from Ethiopia for its superior abrasive quality and improved cutting devices, the Romans were able to cut marble into more precise and thinner sheets. This thinning process meant a greater subdivision of the block, which equaled more potential surface coverage. In this era, marble was celebrated for its mixity, revealing how much its possessor had traversed, literally or figuratively, the empire. Thinning had unleashed a visual culture of luxury. Roman biographer Cornelius Nepos states that Mamurra, he was a military officer under Julius Caesar, was the first man in Rome to cover the walls of his house in marble sheets. Amongst Roman writers and poets, this private luxury was condemned as amoral. As a means of avoiding such criticism, whilst fulfilling luxurious curiosities, paintings offered an escape. Inside the Villa Boscoreale, close to Pompeii, imaginary scenes were painted depicting surreal worlds of marble meeting natural settings. So then, at the height of Augustus's empire, marble was also an expression of the state. In temples, basilicas, and the great Forum Romanum, the ground plane was paved in marble, connecting cities all across the empire with statues depicting Augustus as a warrior. From France, Italy, Spain, Libya, the Balkans, and Egypt, the emperor saw his empire and his subjects saw him. When Augustus proclaimed that he, quote, found Rome a city of bricks and left a city of marble, he constructed a visual image in society's mind. When the empire collapsed in 300 AD, prosperity and external trade declined, and as such, marble faced a crisis of supply. What emerged during this period was a vast culture of scavenging, a surgical restructuring of the city's material. Spolia, which what they were called, were repurposed pieces of marble, columns, plinths, ornaments, all dismounted from one building or setting and transplanted into another. And this transplanting of one marble next to another created eclectic compositions. each marble contrasting its neighbor with its own visual and cultural history. Here, marble was nomadic. Today, the Pantheon's walls are a testament to the seemingly desperate removal and transformation of marble. Material deemed fixed and permanent was dismantled and consumed by the metabolic process of city evolution. In the 16th century, the construction of the facade of San Petronio, originally intended as a civic temple, this is in Bologna, rather than a church, was halted due to political pressure from the Catholic Church. It remains unfinished to this day, a reminder of the polarizing nature that marble possesses. Marble found monumental expression in the obelisk made at the request of Mussolini. Here the aim was to extract the single largest block of marble from the quarries in Carrara. As you can see, this involved hundreds of quarrymen extracting and moving the 36-meter-long mass, 300 tons in weight, down from a mountain summit 800 meters above the sea. Following this, 80 oxen would drag it for 9 miles, leaving a trail of destruction for villages and streets, finally arriving at the sea. From here, it would be transported by a series of tugboats before finally being erected as a monument at the Forum Mussolini in Rome. Marble verticality continues in the form of a skyscraper. The Aeon Center in Chicago, when completed, was the world's tallest marble building, clad entirely with 43,000 slabs of Italian Carrara marble. Placed in a location with large fluctuations in temperature, put the marble slabs under so much pressure that they began to crack, bow, with one panel eventually detaching and falling to the ground. On the right, stainless steel straps were added to temporarily hold the marble in place. Following this, the marble was removed and a new, stronger granite facade was applied. An epic fail. Perhaps one of the most exemplary applications of marble in modern times is the Pius Church in Meggen, Switzerland, constructed in 1966. From the outside, the church looks like an industrial shed with a dark steel structure and a white infill facade. It is only on the inside, when daylight passes through the slab, that the marble is illuminated to create this intense architectural experience. The facade is made of translucent marble sheets, 28 millimeter thin. Marble is present by stealth, its translucency assuming the element of surprise, no longer defining space in a monodirectional, dominant manner of the past. Marble can now be perceived closer to its etymological origin, which is that of a gleaming stone. In the evening, inner lighting reverses the effect, and the building glows outwards. Similar to the Pius Church, although never realized, this iconic speculation by Mies van der Rohe saw a single horizontal marble band applied to the hangar typology. To this day, this remains a scale and application yet unrealized. Today, marble blocks can be cut into thin slabs and injected with compressed resin. A procedure follows which binds a fiberglass sheet to one side to add further strength, followed by a preheating of the slab with hot air before applying a final layer of protective wax glue. Once out of the factory, marble is something entirely different from its original state when extracted from the quarry. Civilized, code-compliant, air-dried, and Botoxed. With this new thinness, technology is close to reaching an endpoint in the abstraction and commodification of the material. A slab can only be so thin before it literally disappears. Today, tiling of marble is the most common application. Such application of marble aggravates some of the most world's peculiar people. The bathroom in the Villa Necchi uses mirror to expand its scale and architectural effect. The bathroom an echo of a distant quarry face. The last room of domestic escapism, the bathroom, is a common destination for marble. With the commodification of the material and its globalized nature, potentially everyone can have marble. Yet, paradoxically, in this drive of distribution, we have lost our fundamental connection with marble as a material. We have perfected how to extract it and how to have it, thin or thick, transparent or opaque, polished or matte, big or small. It is precisely at this moment that our society seems unsure how to use it, so we put it everywhere and anywhere. It is approximated that 25% of extracted Carrara marble is used in architecture and design. The rest is grinded into powder and used in a variety of different industries. And for this 15-minute Prada fashion show, OMA and AMO created an infinite enfilade comprising a series of sculpted marble rims. Although something is off, can you spot it? Fortunately, or unfortunately, marble has been photographed and printed on paper. Might we be the first culture to embrace the cultural presence of marble through its simulation? Would we miss it? Would we even notice?
So, what does this presentation reveal? In extracting material from the earth, humanity reveals a sense of entitlement to the natural. If primitive man hunted and gathered, the extraction of marble can be understood as an extreme form of gathering. The quarry is a symbol of humanity's will to settle, establish community, and shape the surroundings. It was never forgotten, forbidden, or superseded. On the contrary, the ubiquitous use of marble reveals a cultural continuity, an obsession. No other building material conveys the weight of the past the way marble does. Soft enough to manipulate, yet hard enough to last, the artefacts of marble trace civilization's greatest achievements and its deepest contradictions. Marble artifacts are material records of the cumulative enterprise of society and the evolution of thinking through a material. It has been used as a symbol of hope for sacrificial purposes, as a painted monolith, scavenged and moved around nomadically, as a signifier of empire, desire, fascism, humanism, and globalized capitalism. There are more than 4,000 years between us and the Cycladic culture, there are more than 4,000 years between us and the Cycladic culture, and still our intuition for this material persists. Consciously or unconsciously, marble is part of our experience in the world, prompting diametrically opposing interpretations, vulgarity and beauty, repression and generosity. What is it about marble that has captured the imagination of fascist dictators and Renaissance masters alike? What is your view on marble? From an architectural perspective, marble is extremely versatile. It has the potential for gravitas, plasticity, thinness, and surprise. It can be used as an opaque block, a translucent veil, and if highly polished, it reveals its essence as a fragment of the planet. In terms of global marble resource, it's believed that our cumulative history has extracted less than 2% of what's available, meaning we have barely scratched the surface. According to engineer Steve Webb, we are entering into a new stone age where material from the earth is a practical and ethically viable alternative to the global dependence on wood, steel, and concrete, which looks an increasingly untenable model for the future. What then is the next chapter for Project Marble and earthbound materials more generally? How might we give marble a cultural presence in the spirit of our times? To answer this, we want to summarize the primary issue we have with marble use today. This issue is part of a wider problem of our present culture. Sorry. Historically, a regional displacement of marble would have involved extracting it from a quarry, manipulating it in a factory and applying it in a city, perhaps in the form of a monument or a church facade. The distance between quarry and endpoint is regional. Today, marble use is globalized. It's extracted from a quarry, transported to a port, shipped across the ocean, manipulated in a factory before being distributed once again across the ocean to an end location, perhaps to be used in the form of a monument, but increasingly in the form of a tile in almost every typology of building imaginable. There is a continental displacement of material which has no logical basis. This is one of the most fundamental issues concerning the contemporary use of marble. It speaks of a culture that can have almost anything, oblivious to consequence. Marble has become ubiquitously owned, yet it has lost any sense of value. Today, architecture as a composition of materials bears little connection to a place. Swept around the world in a system of desire, material is uprooted, placeless, a raw commodity which inevitably finds the lowest common denominator application. The following is an alternative to the global displacement of material. Extract material from an initial point, i.e. the quarry, and move it to the closest end point. Here, reformulate it into architecture. This is a simple yet powerful premise. What we find extremely exciting about this section is the ability to multiply the effect of your efforts. You can get more than what you put in. Consider the image above. If you extract material from the ground, you can use this material. You can use this material to create architecture above, here represented by the two cubes. Surplus to this, you have the resultant negative space that's left behind, the holes in the ground. This leftover space becomes architectural too. We call this a hyperlocal approach, a phrase our students are probably bored of hearing now, but they're developing this idea further. It's sustainable because you create something subterranean and something above ground in the shortest distance available, using that which is in closest proximity to you. In that sense, the formula is radically sensible, verging on the naive. Take this section. It represents any given site. The ground material may consist of grass, mud, clay, chalk, stone, granite, marble, any earth-bound material. Above ground is the open space for potential development. The following collages are ways of reformulating this section. They're conceptual in nature and therefore might be architecture or something yet unimagined. They're open to your interpretation. In extracting two triangles and recomposing them above ground, you create a large negative valley. The same principle with greater articulation creates a tiered section. These sections have no scale. Is it 10 meters or 100 meters tall? The potential of this hyperlocal method is the viability to build extremely big in a sustainable way. Here, material is recomposed directly above in a way that spans to create a great hall, with light entering from above, not unlike the Pantheon. This section is bordered by ziggurat forms above, which protect a single object within. What fascinates us about the hyperlocal approach is its capacity to imagine new types of sections, new earth spaces below and new earthworks above. We wonder who would build and live in such local structures. What would they look and feel like? The hyperlocal approach resonates with the recent ideas of Kenneth Frampton, who stated, "Today, I think architecture has more to learn from landscape design than landscape design has to learn from architecture." In short, this may be a way to ground architecture as far as possible in the earth itself. Also, Michael Heiser's notion of what he says is that we live in a schizophrenic period. We are living in a world that is technological and primordial simultaneously. We believe the hyperlocal approach would be realized using modern techniques, resulting in an architecture which stimulates primordial desire. In this sketch, we imagine a new type of ideal section in which geology, architecture, and environment form a sculptural and harmonious union. Is it a building, a landscape, a city, a monument? You decide. Whatever it is, it appears to logically, effortlessly emerge from the substance in which it sits. As part of this hyperlocal method, we believe material can be elevated from a mere local resource to an artifact with meaning. This arises when citizens of a place are directly confronted with the material in which they reside. Rather than existing in a world in which material comes to you from everywhere and nowhere, here you are inextricably bound to your material locality. We believe this is the root of a new hyperlocal cultural presence. Such a direct aesthetic experience with the material reality of a place, its complex geological past, and its innate architectural potential has the capacity to elevate human consciousness as to why material matters. Such confrontation is a reminder of what the world actually is. In a world of such speed and digitization, material experience pronounces reality in its most vivid way. To close this presentation, we want to give an account for such an experience by sharing a project of ours. It's called the Marble Hut.
I heard it mentioned in the cellars. They described a kind of phantom object with no apparent author, no owner. Nobody knew where it was and if it even existed. Most people thought it was a myth, a piece of folklore. But I remember it vividly. It was crystalline white, a kind of color normally only perceived in your mind's eye. How did it get here? Up in the mountains, it was utterly improbable. People called it a hut, although I never knew why. It was more like an artifact from a past civilization. On the front and back were giant symbols. It was immaculate. I got the impression someone was religiously polishing it every night. In the middle was a crack like an entry to a cave. I realized I could climb up and inside the marble block. Gargantuan pieces had somehow been moved, sculpted, and placed back in the block. A series of negative spaces were left behind. I worked my way through the block in a kind of contorted struggle, not knowing where I was or what I was looking for. I emerged in a space to sit, a throne with a view down the valley. It was my eye to the outer world, another world. I then found myself contained in a bulbous form, which reminded me of a drop of water, clouds and rays passing over my head. It was as if each of these spaces had been intimately sculpted to subsume my body. Architecture, silence, transcendence. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's on. Thank you for a great presentation and really provocative. We'd like to open this up to you guys to ask questions of them and start a discussion with them. So.
Come on, Sam. You're never that quiet. Come on.
The material marble used in a built sense, quarrying it from the ground, how would you imagine extracting structure from the ground and reassembling it? Would you want to extract it in a kind of pre-assembled form, or the processes that come along with extraction, the machines that would need to be built hyperlocally?
Yeah.
How would you want to implement that into a construction process?
Yeah, I mean, typically marble is extracted in these cubes, pixels. They're approximately 3 by 2.5 meter by 2.8 in size, and this is a kind of a perfect module to be distributed on the back of lorries and so on. And it's also to do with the wires, the diamond wires bits of technology that you use to extract these. What happens just now is that is extracted from there on a lorry. It goes down to a port, and it goes to literally the other end of the world, where it's cut into fine slabs. The waste, because not everything is usable, because what might happen when you go in here, you might find a piece of marble that's not exactly usable to you. It has a lot of veins and a lot of cracks. This becomes waste material. So ultimately, if you were going to use this in a sustainable and contemporary way, it would be about trying to take this into the most local place you could, and do the minimum amount to it to be able to reformulate it into architecture. And this is a little bit what we were trying to do with this last project, because essentially that is a block, and all we've done is we've used a few very precise cuts. You extract the marble from the marble block, and then you manipulate this, and then you replace it back in. So here we're really wondering in architecture, almost like, what is the minimum you can do to create architecture? And that is something I think in contemporary architecture, there's always this will to design, to do more. How refined, how almost elaborate, or how complex can we make it? When in actual fact, there's a real skill to know how to do as little moves as possible. So I think that would be something to explore. Actually, more generally in your projects, what is the least amount that you can do? Because the least amount you can do ultimately feeds down to what is the least amount a builder would do. What is the, and that really trickles down into the construction process, the costs, and so on and so forth. So it's not necessarily simplicity, but it's like, what can you reduce it to?
But what is interesting about this is that currently, I think in the profession, this is not stipulated because your fee is a percentage of the construction cost. So actually access is built into the profession, because you kind of trying to, in order for you to earn more.
Explain that a little bit more.
Well, I guess when you make a project, depending on the country, your fee is maybe 10-15%, on average 12.5%, I think, of the overall construction cost. So in a way, in a weird way, it's in your interest to design more. It's built into the system that there is a lot of work for you, and that a lot of materials are used and transported, and everything has to be calculated, and all of that generates work, which then creates maybe a more complex building. So then your fee increases. But actually, it would be interesting to think how we could stipulate something like appropriateness back into the system, so that actually the more intelligent solution or the more minimal intervention is rewarded, the more appropriate solution is. So it's more about maybe the thinking that goes into the design, rather than how much you're doing and therefore how much you're getting paid. And I think that's also a question of how value is generated.
Thank you. I have a question for you, and commentary too, maybe. There's a kind of paradox here. On the one hand, it's a very beautiful method of generating spaces, I think, as a kind of architectural paradigm. And then I try to imagine what it would be like to be in one of those quarries. And if I follow your logic, your polemic, then I would want to move all my machinery to the place. And I would then become someone like Paolo Soleri with Arcosanti, where he lived out his entire life trying to build Arcosanti, using the materials extracted from the earth and casting them and so forth. So whilst I enjoy the paradox, maybe there's a level of inhabiting the consequences of the polemic today that are to do with the kind of reoccupation of landscapes that are both with the machinery for the production of this and the mode of living in those kind of interesting spaces that you showed us. Do you have some ambition for that, or some thoughts on how that could go?
Do you? I mean, you're right to say it's a polemic. It's almost like a diagram of an attitude of how you could treat a general condition. For this, in a way, you could almost apply this to a city. There's a lot of clay underneath us in London. We don't really seem to consider clay in an extremely viable way. You know, it's almost like there's systems which inform the construction industry and products, effectively products, which you're kind of obliged to choose from. And in a way, we are offering this out as a kind of a polemical opposite endpoint where you simply see the earth as a resource. And that, to some people, might sound the complete antithesis of what you would expect on a Climate Matters Week. But fundamentally, there's no such thing as non-extractive architecture. Everything has to come from somewhere. This is one thing we're talking about in the unit, is that steel is natural insofar as it's made up of all of the things that you found in the earth. It's how it's made is that's the insanity, and that's what we've invented. We've invented these systems to create synthetic materials which are incredibly wasteful, incredibly energy absorbent, and there could be something like a way of the opposite end of the spectrum is a little bit this premise of using what is closest to you in the most intelligent way.
But there's also something interesting, I think, about stone in general, and marble in particular, which relates to this idea of embodied energy, that actually in the case of stone, it is the earth itself that put in the heat, to say it simply, because actually through geological transformations, it's what hardened the material. So we don't need to heat it up. We have a material that has already structural potential, and we could technically, we could technically inhabit both the spaces of extraction and the material we extract pretty directly, because we have something that is already a structure. We need to carve or make the spaces within, but there is already a material which has a structure that was formed by it. The problem with stone or marble is a lot of this, of the energy balance is still how it's being extracted. You know, that it uses a lot of explosives, that it's relying on petrol machinery like diamond cutters and so on, but also that it's being shipped to places to be worked. So the local culture of working the material and the local knowledge is getting increasingly lost.
I'm just thinking through what you're saying about material. The Mayans inhabited the karst spaces with a K, the water-eroded spaces in limestone. So I think there's, within your polemic, there's a potential for extending the polemic to engaging with geological processes that take a very long time, but some of them can be accelerated, and then starting to occupy spaces of erosion, which is a naturalized process that could be accompanied by smaller and very, very precise machinic extraction. And I think there are, sorry everyone, I'm taking over this conversation, but it really intrigues me. There are newer technologies of very small robots and activities that are completely different to the massive earth-moving cutting machinery that we knew from the past, in which a small group of people, probably unit-sized, could go out and make an excavation and move the material, and there's a potential there, I think. I'm going to pass the microphone to someone else.
Yeah, so that's almost that's a little bit like what would Walter Siegel do if he was interested in this model. I think that's an interesting way to maybe develop it.
In terms of the technology.
Yeah, but this kind of localized, the idea of a localized scale to it.
I have a question about labor, because I thought the image that you showed about the Mussolini monument, and you showed the image of the marble being extracted, and you mentioned the number of people, the oxygens, the energy. And I think when you talk about these like global production chain, that it went from Carrara to Rome, but nowadays is Carrara to China to the US.
Yeah.
In that transition, also the local knowledges about how to process the marble have been lost.
Totally, yeah.
So how does hyper-locality deal with those knowledges and skills and new labor, new forms of labor?
Yeah, yeah. This is a great point, and this is exactly what happened in Carrara. They had this. For those of you that don't know Carrara, I would really advise to go there and see it. It's an incredible place, but essentially it had a very rich village where Henry Moore and all of these incredible sculptors, where Michelangelo used to go there originally to get his marble. So it's got this great lineage of a marble history, and now the village doesn't exist. It's a kind of remnant of what was once a factory full of artisans and people who knew this material, but it was just simply cheaper to stick it on a boat and send it to the other end of the world. And yet it's lost this local knowledge. And I think in the hyperlocal approach, what you would be advocating is a localized labor that really knew the material around them in a very, very specific way. And they would have a relation to the people as well. So that it would be in many ways, when you think about this, it sounds romantic. It sounds almost primitive, right? Because it's essentially using the logic of primitive people who would settle in a place and simply extract the material, the bamboo,
But it's because of a lack of means, and I think what you're trying to get at is there is new means that are maybe, and they can also create maybe another kind of aesthetic. Maybe there is still a bit too much like primitive aesthetic here that you can get quite obsessed with, but in a way, I think also other ways, new technologies could help to develop a way of visualizing and testing also the consequences that develops a new also aesthetic language and experience. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm finished.
But yeah, that's and I think that's the point. And hopefully, I think that's what you're going to see from these incredible Inter-11 projects by the end of this year. Well, you'll basically see elaborations of this idea of working hyperlocally, because it's essentially something like a premise right now. But what that would produce, I don't see as it's almost taken the intelligence of the primitive logic or the necessity of the primitive logic, but applying it in a contemporary context. What that would produce as architecture in the end is yet to see. Christian?
I'm sort of imagining this like very interesting way of development, how that would change. Just not necessarily single structures, but sort of on a greater scale where you almost create these networks or neighborhoods of almost like how schools are local. Mm-hmm. You could maybe create these centers of knowledge on how to work with this material locally, and then these builders or excavators could then move within this radius, and then of course it would change as to where you are and the material you're working with. Mm-hmm. And I think that this, like, have you guys imagined this sort of larger development way of working like this?
not beyond the kind of ideas that you have, but I think that would generate kind of a local culture. I mean, what was the Frampton essay? The critical regionalism. This is also was a little bit inspired by an essay which you should all read. It's called Towards a Critical Regionalism by Kenneth Frampton, and he is discussing this idea of how do you, in a globalized world, how do you give architecture how do you root architecture in some way? And what has it got to do with a community and maybe a localized culture within a globalized culture? So he didn't quite go to the extremes that we're going. He was essentially saying you can use the globalized, let's say, kit of parts, but you use them in a kind of local context. Mm-hmm. And we've almost taken this one step further to really take the locality to an extreme. But I think, the culture that would be generated from this of builders, and almost where people would know what is the local resource and maybe how much is it, what is the next local building going to be produced from, how do we even do this? I think it would generate a little bit like the Cycladic people that made the same sculptures. Maybe it develops a kind of a language for your place.
I'm also thinking that maybe this would affect speed. So I think speed has a lot to do with the way we develop right now. Because you can bring materials to you, you can actually be fast. Mm-hmm. But I actually think this might be slower development because you have to be more careful. Because you're displacing where you're building, you have to be precise as to how you're displacing. How we behave now when we're building is that the displacement we're unaware of, and we're just bringing material. Exactly. So it's actually because we want to build fast. And I think it's quite obvious that because we can build so fast, we are quite wasteful. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think building slow this could be.
That's a great point.
I was always imagining them a bit like these. Yeah, maybe there's echo. Like these, this building huts when cathedrals were made. And I mean, they developed this incredible high skill knowledge of a single material or a certain amount of material and an incredible skill to work this with material, but over generations, centuries. I mean, some cathedrals took hundreds of years, 800 years in the cathedral in Cologne, for example, to complete. So there is actually this point of like a knowledge that gets and experience that gets passed down in generations and sort of, evolves over time, but also, requires more care because you're eventually taking material not from somewhere else where you will never go and experience the consequences, but you are experiencing, if in fact already in some sense inhabiting the consequences of your material extraction.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it becomes a two-part process where you have to design the thing above and you have to design the consequence, right? That, as you have rightly said, we have no real conception of where materials come from. We've all heard the discussion about our phones and the cobalt in the phones, and we know that's coming from pretty ghastly places. But we don't really. There's a kind of disconnect between the place and the end product, and there would be something about this hyperlocal model that you would have a very tangible understanding of what you're taking out and what you're using, because it would be kind of before your eyes.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's also, when we said this before, there's of course some naivety or dreaming in this, because I think it's also, I'm not sure how realistic it is that we all would inhabit the same material. But I think what we're also arguing for is a degree of appropriateness of use of material. So that's where these acrolithic forms are interesting, these early temples where the marble was only used where, this was the same true for sculptures on a smaller scale, that a particular material was only used for its most appropriate, so the body was made maybe out of timber, then there was something else strapped around it, and they only used marble in the face and the feet and the hands, the bits that needed to required more sculptural refinement. And I think we could also think about it in terms of a building composition, in terms of how you are assembling something and how you're using material in a most appropriate way.
I'd just like to ask like a question arise from what he's just said. Like, how can we bring back marble since it's such a sustainable material? We just discussed like it's so versatile, it's so durable, it will last for years. But due to increase of synthetic materials like laminates and tiles, which is replacing marble as a which is such a sustainable material, how can we bring back marble as a modern material?
I guess that's part of the question is what I don't think we really know what marble is in a modern sense, because I think, at least if we look how it's being used today, it's, as you're saying, it's a tile predominantly, or it's, for the most part, it's actually fake. It's fake marble. It's a kind of these resin composites that look like it. We were speaking to a friend the other day who is an architect in Korea, and he was saying precisely this, is that in many ways, we've maybe abandoned the idea of it. There's other people that would say, why would you do it when you can, why would you use marble when you can 3D print something that looks identical to marble? You know, so these, it's also the same with the British Museum around the corner that are now in the process of making replicas of masterpieces. So it's also a little bit of change in our culture where we're going into the realm of facsimiles, of identical copies, and who knows where this will go, because it might simply go, I hope not, but I don't know if I hope it, but it might go in a direction simply where we won't really care about the material anymore. It'll be what the thing actually conveys. You know, if we can produce it synthetically, then will we even desire marble anymore? Maybe it will in the future. Marble will be a distant memory. I don't know, and I don't know that we could actually change it. Other than as an architect, you can try to use it in a project and innovate with it, and try and convince your client that it would be something worth having. Beyond the very banal use of it.
Because from the carbon footprint point of view also, I guess it's a more better material, rather than, because as the material is more synthetic, the more workmanship and more hours is going to develop it. So I guess, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
I was just wondering what kind of an impact would these regions have if they started using more of hyperlocal material, and would that have a significant change to the architectural expression of that region? So how would that sort of be, just as a speculation, if you were to speculate?
I almost think it's something that already exists or has existed more in the past, where you see cities like Aberdeen built from local granite. So, by necessity in the past, materials would be used fairly locally because, of limitations of transport, means, energy that could be expended, and because we have sort of unleashed the beast, we have the capacity to transport things everywhere. So in a way, I think this idea of being surrounded or living in a place that it's made up of the material in which it rests already exists, and maybe the kind of modern city has lost it a little bit, and certain materials became ubiquitous. But I think now the question is, well, if this idea of the extreme of the hyperlocal came back, there would be a new aesthetic, surely emerging, which is maybe to do with the hypermodern technology you would be using. And maybe it's at different scales, maybe it has different cutting patterns, maybe it has different abilities to work the material. So I think it also depends on the types of mechanisms and technologies we are able to develop to work with these materials. So maybe it would be something between a sort of primordial, I don't know, something ultra modern, but at the same time also something that touches our primordial instincts.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Last question, please.
If you have more questions or really disagree or whatever, we are also opposite Ingrid's office every Tuesday on Friday. We can
Come by.
Yes, we can discuss it further.
How do you start to go towards implementing a hyper-localized strategy from where we already are?
That's the million dollar question. Yeah.
Aren't you the expert?
No. I think it has to be the architect who you've got to convince. I would say you've got to try and convince your client, or you've got to be the one to instigate change. I don't think anything will change. I guess there's new regimes of control to try and get you to operate in a more sustainable way. But ultimately, if you want to kind of be inventive and really pitch a hyper local model, you would have to come up with the justification. Now, the best one I ever saw, or the best justification I ever saw, was an office called Lacaton and Vassal, where they had quantified literally with numbers why to do a project in a certain direction just didn't make any sense compared with their alternative proposal, which just made obvious sense. So it was almost like you've got to just convince people with almost like a raw analysis and a kind of a beautiful strategy and an image that goes with it. If it's just numbers, nobody's going to buy into it. But I think as an architect, I guess today you're not just making buildings anymore. You have to make almost strategies of how to exist in a sustainable way, and then how to really facilitate that. So you kind of have to be a multifaceted person that can work with your skills to convey ideas and diagrams in all forms and formats. So I think it's really ultimately on you, on us.
But I think already from a mathematical or numerical perspective, it can be quite convincing, because you're basically, I think if you're looking at embodied carbon or embodied energy of material, when you're using local material, you're basically cutting out the transport. You are maybe developing skills on a local scale, which might be more energy effective. So you are basically being able to, you are already numerically speaking being able to make a kind of convincing sustainable architecture. And what we're trying to get at is that you might even then be able to justify building, if this is even an interest by a hypothetical client, it's potentially sustainable to build big again. So I think you would have to test it, but I think there's something in this idea that we are not confined to certain scales, but we could maybe argue even for potentially larger structures if we're building in this way.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for the session. Material Matters, a material training ground exploration with Raue Materials and the AA Material Arcade. I am Jingxi, and with Fergus and Charlotte, we have been core members of the AA Material Arcade since last year. For this special afternoon, we are joined by the fabulous Frida from Rini Materials. Together, we want to explore how we as a student body can transform our own institutions and rethink how we as designers can engage with the material world around us. Before we hand over to Frida, we would like to recap on the AA Material Arcade, who we are, how we came to be here, and where we would like to go. In the next.
Could we have a quick show of hands? Has anyone here heard about the Material Arcade or has engaged with us? Great, that's almost everyone. If you've ever been with us, then you will know that the Material Arcade is a student-led initiative dedicated to the reuse of materials within the AA, and that we're located in 38 second floor front, as you can see in the picture. Our material library is a cabinet of curiosities filled with all your needs and wildest material dreams.
So the Material Arcade started 2 years ago with passionate students from Diploma 18 who sought to create a library of reclaimed materials, in part to better inform ourselves of materials at the end of life cycle, but also to give access to a system of free exchange of materials. We won't go deeper into the history of material flows at the AA, as fascinating as it is, but in short, while there were and still are numerous ways that the AA provides students with materials, the Material Arcade is unique in that it focuses on creating a circularity so that we make best use of what is already available and limit the use of virgin materials.
As we live in a world where demolition is common and materials scarce, the Material Arcade is a small-scale reuse hub. We hope that our efforts to facilitate reuse within our school inspire students to scale the system up and incorporate the ideas in our real world. Here some wall panels are being deconstructed for reuse, a picture by Rotor. Often this doesn't happen though, due to various reasons. Time is money, health and safety concerns, lack of storage, and very often due to lack of initiative. With the initiative from the Material Arcade, we now have a library full of used and surplus materials free for anyone. We intercept the acquisition and disposal of materials, giving students a platform to create a circular flow within the system of our school community.
Our mission is to reuse, inspire people to rethink material flows and return to a material culture where the design and material procurement is interlinked. What we do. Our main jobs are collecting materials from students, the workshop, skips, construction sites, etc. We sort the materials and redistribute them within the AA. Student donations and collections is our main body of work. Materials in our library are from students, maintenance and facilities, the library, print centre, photo studio, wood and metal workshop, and most recently, thanks to Ramtin in the Design and Make programme, also from Hook Park. This year, we've also collaborated with Public Programme to avoid wasting materials, and we provided Henry's Media Studies course, as well as tomorrow's plasterboard workshop with materials from Project Review and Exhibition. We also source materials from outside the school.
We hope that we can inspire you to rethink in a way that you design. And how can you participate and make meaningful change? You can design for disassembly, you can dismantle your models, you can transport materials back to us in 38 second floor front, and you can reuse what's available. Here are some before pictures of materials that students picked up from us. And here's some pictures of the models that they made with them.
All right, returning to material culture. We used to design with what's at hand, but this is no longer the case. But in order to revive this practice, we need to work collaboratively as a school community. In the last academic year, we were lucky to grow and get more attention from the school community. We've held several swap day events and collaborated with Lawn, public programming and facilities to promote reuse and save materials from ending up in the skip.
Now a little bit on the Material Arcade this year. We have a carbon calculator linked to the self-checkout form next to our material library, and connected it to the AA Low Carbon Survey, which was published last night. Turns out we've contributed to almost 2 tons of carbon savings in the last year alone. However, due to our poorly insulated school building, unfortunately, we did not contribute negatively in a positive way to the AA carbon footprint. There's a lot of potential to prevent more materials from being thrown away into landfill and deviate the material flow at our school. We want to make reuse at the AA a collective effort. We do this by encouraging students who use Material Arcade to engage in the process, whether that be in collecting, organization, or volunteering their time.
Join us on Friday, this Friday, for a workshop to deconstruct old models from the TS office, as well as some structures from the Zoo Bar exhibition. This year, we also introduced a set of open hours so students know when to drop by our shop. We are also active on Instagram, many of you might already know, and we have an email account for newsletters. On both platforms, you can reach us for material donation and collection. We normally inform on both platforms about our events. This is also how we connected with Raue Materials. Now let's pass the mic to Frida, one of the leaders of Raue Materials.
Thank you so much for having me and us as Raue Materials. I'm the co-founder. The other half is Vazi. But our team grew, and now we are a bunch of young people who believe that there is a need for a rethinking of how we treat materials, how we source them, how we dispose them. So we want to fight, or we are fighting, for a world without wasted materials. How we started and how I met you guys is that we started quite similar. So we are UAL former students, and we set up a circular material hub in central St. Martin's. And that was very impactful. We had an engagement of 2,500 students. So more students used our hub than they would use the cafeteria. We turned over 8.5 tons of materials and engaged over 40 companies. Because similar to you guys, we understood that actually within the building, there's already so much material left. And it's only wasted because it's at the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong name. A name in terms of label, so that something is called a tablecloth, and therefore we think, oh yeah, no, I don't need a tablecloth, but actually it's a resource of textile. So someone who wants to do a jacket for autumn can gladly use this. So these 3 factors are determined to something and turn it into waste. By changing these 3 parameters, it becomes a treasure. So the old saying of someone else's trash can be someone else's treasure really got proven with our concept. The students loved it. We have some quotes. One was saying that, for university, alongside workshops and classes, something like a circular material hub, here in that case called Swap Shop, is necessary because it gives a place for the students to actually source their materials sustainably and for free. But then it's also a space to get inspiration, because we all know, okay, we are, with our mood board, we have a kind of an idea, a concept, but how do we turn that into materiality? So then maybe we know of 5 materials we have been working with in the past, but coming to a place such as you have here, and that's amazing that you got that, is like a hub for inspiration. You go there and you see 2 random objects next to each other, and your beautiful creative brain will connect them, and that is where so much creativity can happen. But we also got great insights from educators and workshop facilitator who said, well, actually, at the end of the day, our skips and bins are more empty. Or this is a quote from Simon Donald, who said that the design outcome was actually higher because the students have been prototyping more and experiment with other kinds of materials. Here are some examples of what students have been making out of the materials. But then, now I come to part 2 of the talk, because our relationship with CSM got tricky, because you are lucky that this university is really supporting this, and I hope they really understand the need and they will actually help you to turn it into a constant and permanent space. Now, this didn't happen for us, but we had a plan B, or actually that was our plan A, to create a digital marketplace, a digital material hub, as we call it. So that's up and running. I'll show you the QR code in a second. But what we do is that we connect companies and their leftover materials with students, creatives, and makers who need it. So it's in a bigger scale. We say it's like too good to go, but for materials. This is how it looks. Companies upload pictures and descriptions on our platform. Creatives can purchase them and pick it up themselves or get it conveniently shipped to their doorstep. You can find anything from paper, textile, wood, metal, glass, paint, and so on this platform. Some of our companies are G.F. Smith for paper, Bill Emberg Studios for leather, T.B. Bennett for any kind of architecture sampling. If you have your phone with you, this is your chance to scan the QR code. But also don't worry. If you remember Raue Materials, you just go on our Instagram website or whatsoever. Now, what is for the company the great win is that we help them to reduce their cost for disposal, but also to help them to actually turn these materials into revenue. But on the other hand, the creatives, for them, it's a big win as well. They get the materials 50% cheaper, and they have finally a source for sustainable sourced materials and a great alternative to buying new. As you were mentioning, Charlotte, with your calculator, the amazing thing is that reuse allows us to save CO emission 3 times. One, because we reduce waste, and waste, when it's in landfills or in incinerator, creates CO2. But also, we reduce the need for new virgin resources. So the exploitation of nature is decreasing by reusing. And then all the carbon, which is used actually to make new paper, new textile, and so on. So we cut on these 3 levels, which is an enormous amount and very, very impactful. And this is it from me.
Thank you so much.
Now we move on to Q&A session. Here's the question for Frida. You mentioned you started as us did, as we do, started within the school of UAL and then move out to your own business. Could you elaborate on your journey of finding external business? How did you find the companies and how did you actually get started working with them?
Gladly. So the initial idea was born outside uni. We pitched it at the London Mayor's Entrepreneur Competition. And then we went to the finals, but what we had been missing was a concept of proof. And we pitched it from the beginning as a digital marketplace. We said it's like, it's an app, it's like too good to go, but for materials. But for that, you need a critical mass on both sides. You need tons of companies and even more creators on the other side. And then we turned it in our master thesis because we said, okay, actually, we can just use the resources which we have around us. And that's how we started then the physical space in university, but always had this in mind that actually it should go beyond universities. So from very early on, we got in contact with companies and then actually reduced that outreach because we understood that there's already so much within the university that there's almost no need to get more things from outside. And we only did that for high quality materials. And then it's about network building. Our experience with the companies, so we present ourselves to them as an alternative to current waste disposal method, because they're actually in a pretty tricky situation. They are put under pressure that they reduce their waste, but often within a production cycle, it's very difficult to cut out waste. My background is in fashion, so I know a bit more from there, and there was the zero waste pattern for a few years a trend. But no one really, it's a trend which was, of course, not being successful, because who wants to put a square piece of fabric around a like an organic shaped body. So there will be always offcuts. And again, as I was saying before, it's just a matter of finding the right place and the right time for these leftovers. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
And Material Arcade has been around school for a few years. We somehow have changed the way that students approach materials for their projects. How do you think can the school learn from us? This is open to everyone.
I think, like Frida said before, students coming in and looking at materials side by side and realizing, oh, I can do something with that. Just designing out of necessity. I remember when I was in my third year here, I didn't have any money. I still don't have any money, but I didn't have any money, and I wanted to build a big model. So I just worked with what was available to me. And that made my project that much better, because I could only work with a limited amount of resources, and I had to really dig deeper into what to do with what's available. I think that's definitely one of the things that the school is profiting from by having us, just that added factor of creativity with reuse. Do you have anything to say first?
I think the students engaging is an important part. I think the act of actually participating, like finding the material, messaging us on Instagram if you find something or have something, and then the process of actually recovering that material and going through the entire process we would go through to save some material is something that's super beneficial, because it shows you how much time and is required and to go into it and the effort that goes into it. I think that's really useful, because as we learned throughout this process, and I started off not knowing a lot about it, it makes you realize that actually all it requires is a bit of, I don't know, care, like to be able to do it. I think, I don't know.
And it prepares us for life, right? So we might have theoretical lectures on that the world is doomed and we need sustainable concepts. But then when it actually comes to implementing it, it's often quite limited, because we can only do so much and only use the things we can reach. So with this method, you really are offered a systemic solution which allows you to behave in the way you are theoretically educated.
Yeah, just tapping on that. Again, from my personal experience, what I've learned by being a part of the Material Arcade, last year my project was massively informed by kind of digging into the material flow and changing how supply chains work. I mean, this is a small scale supply chain, but we can still make a massive impact. And I think we saved over 4,000 pounds of plywood from project review exhibition, which is a huge amount of money to our students. And yeah, that's just something we can learn, that just if someone takes initiative, if DIP 18 didn't take this initiative 3 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have saved this much money. And you can have a big impact with a small idea. Yeah, you just need someone to take action.
I think also it's nice being this sort of scale, because you actually can like meet the people that are giving you materials. It's not like some company or bigger thing that's giving you materials. You have someone who comes to 38 second floor and gives you a material. There's something, I don't know, nice about that, and you engage with the person, you participate with them, rather than, I don't know, like some of the companies that you might source from. I don't know if you have a single like, I don't know, it's a company giving you materials rather than a person, and sort of that indirect relation. I think that's something nice that we hope to embrace with the scale of Material Arcade and use.
Yes, this leads to my next question. Actually, the other day, we have a lot of students asking for particular materials through Instagram, say, you have this, that. And also we have students come in to our shop in person and say, I don't know what model to make yet. I just come in to see if I can be inspired by anything I can take from Material Arcade. So here's the question to all of us. Are creativity and reuse compatible? How do we learn to design with what is available? Hands up if any of you have a thing to say.
Sorry, you posed the question, but I think maybe we let that sink in and we come back to that question. But actually, I had a question for Frida. So you mentioned how you actually was cited in Central St. Martin's, and now you're having to go back to Plan B or Plan A into digital. Is that difficult? What are the kind of difficulties are you facing by losing the relationship to the site?
So I think the difference between a physical space and a digital space is that only a few of our senses can be used when it's digital. And especially when it comes to materials, we might want to touch it, we might want to see it in the daylight and not on a picture where we don't know under what kind of Photoshop condition that was taken. So that is something which we are losing in the first step, but we have a solution for that. Because the material is actually kept by the company who has it left. And therefore, if you really care, let's take Bill Emberg, a leather supplier, and you need brown leather. So online you purchase the product, brown leather, but you really mind, you want to touch it, you want to see how soft, hard, thick, thin it is. So you just select pick up, and then you go there directly, and you go there with your voucher, you purchase 5 kg, and then you can select yourself the amount, which then therefore allows you to feel, smell, and see what you want. But the advantage of the digital space is that we can offer endless amount of materials because it doesn't require one physical location to store all of that. So that is really the benefit and like the issue we had with our space in Central St. Martin's, that we could, at some point we had to say, okay, we can't take any donations because our hub was full. And we really want to become an alternative to buying new. And therefore, one of our competitors is actually someone like Amazon. And they're so successful because they're so convenient and they're one platform where you can get anything. So that means we need a big inventory.
Did that answer your question? Yeah. I just want to go on that because you talked about the scale of storage and not having enough room to store things. We fought really hard to finally get our material library, and right now we're in the process of expanding that and maybe, hopefully, having another second location where students can then independently pick up materials, drop off materials that they don't need. So our idea in the school is to not just be this place, this shop where we physically have to be there and we open the door for you to come in and we provide these materials for you, but essentially, we want everyone in this school to think about what they do with the materials, how they use them, how they dispose of them, and maybe give them another home. Maybe it just means that we have a reuse station where people can leave their wood in an allocated area, or their metals, or their papers, or something like that. So that's just looking into the future of something that we are planning to do.
Yeah, and it's like how we said in the presentation, it's changing how you sort of think about it. Maybe your model isn't something that you want to exist for 10 years. It's something that you have exist until the end of year or something like that, and then it can be disassembled. I think thinking in like how long you want something to be around for is something important as well, and how we build and are designed for that.
Last but not least, we've noticed that within our stock of material arcade, there are some materials that have been kind of stayed in our shop for a long time. Nobody seemed to be interested in these materials within our school, but these seem to be popular in some other design schools in London. So how is it time for us to reach out to establish a network across the schools in London or the UK? Is it like digital format, or shall we do a kind of entity meetings at a regular periodic setup?
I think there's a question for the room as well.
I think I can jump on it a little bit. Sorry. I think I was part of Material Arcade last year, and we had a conversation with Recuperatek, which is a kind of a community of French schools, French art schools, and they have a reuse hub altogether, and they hold workshops for reuse. And I think it's interesting to think what would be the kind of the translation of that in the UK context. And I think it would also take a very different form to the continental kind of policies. I think there's a lot more interconnections between Netherlands, France, Belgium, and all these things. So I think it would be interesting to think about what, it is an island, and Brexit has already happened. So what kind of material flow can we reimagine within schools in the UK, especially since we have a very, very huge international population as well? How does that also kind of change the way we think about materials and material supply? But also maybe then I can give this question back to Frida, because now Renault Material is no longer tied back to UAL, but are you still interested in working with art institutions such as the AA or the UAL?
Yes, very much, because again, if we want to be an alternative and a competitor to anyone who sells you new materials, we only can do if we all stick together. And I think I told it to you when we had our intro call. So I would say in many cases, I would be against centralization. But in that case, it makes sense. It makes so much sense to have one platform where all these knots are tied together. So you have one tool to use, which then leads you to all the small and amazing hubs which already happen in London. Because when we did our research, we actually tapped into so many sources which we had no idea of that they exist. So there a scrap store, there is children's scrap shop in Hackney, there's Udomo, so there paint community, like Forest Recycling Centre. There's so many places which already exist, which allow you to reuse, but they currently only operate on a very local level because they don't have the reach. Now, if they offer their materials on a digital platform, that allows them to just have a much wider reach. And this is also the beauty of reuse, it's the matchmaking. So you can have the most random object, and if you show it to 5 of your friends or to one school, then maybe no one has interest. But if you show it to a whole city, there will be someone who has use for it. So that's why it also meant for us that we had achieved a big milestone when we finally had our hub online, because that now allows the facilitation of all these material exchanges. So we would be very happy to have you on there. Also, there's a question in the audience. Just to this note, last thing, there's an idea that it could go beyond universities because universities are kind of having the same flow of materials. The semester starts at the same time. There's the end of the year show more or less in the same month. So there's always, okay, at the beginning, everyone needs materials. At the end, there's so much left. But if you cross these waves with gallery spaces, with other creators, then you actually find a way to move that material in a very efficient way, because as you were saying, storage is one of the crucial parts and which makes it very difficult. So the material turnover has to be very quick.
Yeah, and actually to that point, I was willing to ask the member of Material Arcade, how do you deal with the frustration of not being able to take everything that's on offer? And if the AA as an institution can help you, what can it do for you?
Do you want me? I think, yeah, it's frustrating. I don't know. I think you experience it more than...
Yeah, I've been very frustrated. I've been very frustrated. I mean, we had the idea of getting reimbursed for our work and having that student assistantship position just as something so that we know our work doesn't go unnoticed. It's not just the frustration with not being able to take everything, but just with so many students coming in, not knowing that we volunteer. I don't know how many times people ask me, oh, wait, you're not faculty. And I say, no, I'm not. I'm a student. I'm just like you guys. I just happen to not do any schoolwork sometimes. So it's been frustrating. I think that's been my biggest frustration. And having a platform like this, being able to share this, being able to talk to Frida about this and sharing what we've learned with you, I think that's an outlet of my frustration because this brings me a lot of joy, I think.
Yeah, I think also one part of the Material Arcade, yes, it's that collection bit. I think the other bit is sort of this education and getting people involved in the process and thinking that there's actually an alternative to going to Amazon and buying a new material. I think that's an important side as well. And yes, like not having enough space to store things is like frustrating, but I think also we need to like highlight how important it is to like have people involved and getting people involved in it as well and making it part of the community.
Yeah, and another thing that brings me a lot of joy to make up for the frustration is I also work in the wood and metal workshop, and there's students asking, do you have this material? Do you have this material? And everyone says no, and then I can say, actually, hang on, give me 5 minutes, let me run up and I can get it for you. I think that's a big part, just to be able to give students materials for free that someone else wanted to throw away. I think that's amazing thing.
Yeah, I mean, also there's like no better feeling than getting a signal message saying, I found this material, come and help me lift it back to the AA, when it's something amazing. Like, it's really nice to be able to do that and be involved in that. Like, I don't know, I've made some great friends doing it, and I think that's important as well. Like, if anyone wants to get involved, it's great.
Since I've been running Instagram, so I know how actively students being interested in us, asking us for available times, and that's how if I'm not at school, I'll try my best to come and then make the appointment with the student. So now I think the big thing that I have is I can't contribute all my life in school. I'm always available for students who cannot make it during open hours. So this is how we want to kind of start and build up this self-initiative within all students. We set up this self-checkout forms so that students can help themselves within checking in and checking out materials with our Material Arcade. And hopefully through this process, it's more like a built-in intention for everyone. And so it will be better and better. And also, I believe there are a lot of discussions around this reuse and recycle outside school. We can find like connections in going to their conferences and making presentations and raising more awarenesses and as well. Yeah.
Can we take one last question, please?
I have a question. What I also find really fascinating about this whole beautiful initiative is the potential for collaboration that comes from a material root. Almost like I want to ask you, was there a previous instance in any of your kind of cases where two people or more were interested in the same type of material, where they kind of walked out with an idea for a collaboration?
I would have said that many collaboration happened with unknown, because someone brought and donated some materials and already gave it a certain shape, a certain color, a certain structure, and then someone else picked it up. It's a bit like the Liporello, where someone draws the head, then the body, and then the legs. So these kind of collaboration happen all the time. So it's a great point you are pointing out here, that it is all about collaboration. And then, of course, the human system behind is all about collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had anyone like go in at the same time and grab a material together and walk out skipping or anything. I mean, yeah, I think the side I really love about Material Arcade is the friendships we form just by participating in it. I think there's something really important about that. I really want to emphasize that's probably, I don't know, I wouldn't be doing it for nothing if it wasn't for getting that out of it. I think that's important.
Thank you.